When you think of King David, you probably think about a giant, a slingshot, or maybe an asparagus. But what if I told you that by his 30s, King David was worth the modern equivalent of over $1 billion? By the end of his life, that would have been closer to $200 billion. So what can we learn about biblical finances from the shepherd turned billionaire king? The first money lesson from the life of David is to ignore opinions. In 1 Samuel 17:28, we find David right before he initiates a battle with Goliath. And we find David absolutely talking smack about Goliath in front of all of his Israelite friends. And in verse 28, we read this. Now Eliab, David's eldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men. And Eliab's anger was kindled against David, and he said, "Why have you come down? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your presumption and the evil in your heart." Knowing how the story ends, this is kind of a goofy narrative to read as David's eldest brother comes in and gives his totally unsolicited opinion about David's intent to take on Goliath. And he calls this intent of David evil. Now we know that David's heart wasn't evil because of the way that God praises him for stepping out in faith and boldness to do this. But here's the thing, is that at this point in David's story, all of David's brothers just saw this shepherd boy who was responsible for taking care of a few sheep. But God, in this very moment, was able to see into David's future, and instead of seeing a shepherd boy, he saw a king. And we see in how Eliab responds that his brothers were most concerned about themselves and keeping up their own reputation, but David instead was most concerned with obedience to God. And the reality is that as you and I choose to engage in money, and we step away from the culture and instead decide to live this life in obedience to what God has actually called us to do with our money, other people will come in with their unsolicited advice, their unsolicited opinions about their presumptions about the evil in your heart. And the reality is that a lot of this really does come from a good place. That these people in your life might just be genuinely concerned that you're allowing the love of money to take over your heart. And in the same way that David took Eliab's opinion and just kind of set it to the side, we need to be able to hear these unsolicited opinions, oftentimes from well-intentioned people, and set it to the side for the sake of obedience to what God has called us to do with our money. The second money lesson from the life of David is that building wealth starts with contentment and hard work. King David was excellent at his work well before there was any prestige in what he was doing. When King David was a shepherd, that was seen as the lowest of the low, the most humiliating job you could possibly get. Yet he worked hard, and eventually that led to him becoming king. Psalm 78 talks about this in retrospect, saying, "From following nursing ewes, God brought David to shepherd Jacob his people, Israel his inheritance. With upright heart, David shepherded them and guided them with his skillful hand." This psalm puts beautifully this transition that David underwent from shepherding ewes to shepherding a kingdom. And the same idea is said by Jesus himself when he says that he who is faithful with very little will be faithful with much. So regardless of where you are, regardless of your current net worth and income, be content with what God has given you and work hard at what he's called you to do. The third money lesson from the life of David is that he knew the source of his wealth. 1 Chronicles 29:12 says, "Wealth and honor come from you." And truthfully, this is one of the most difficult lessons for me to learn, is that God is the source of my wealth. I think I knew this intellectually, that God is the source of my money, but still yet I would find myself thinking, God's not working 9 to 5. God's not investing this money. Why should I praise him for everything that I've done myself? And the only way I was able to kind of overcome this temptation to believe that I was the source of my own money was to remember that God was the person who gave me this job in the first place. That yes, I'm the one working 9 to 5 in obedience to him. Yes, I'm the one who's investing my money in obedience to him. But if it wasn't for him stepping in and giving me the opportunity for maybe the certifications that we have or the degrees that we possibly have in order to get the jobs that we have, we wouldn't have any of these things. If you're liking this content, like and subscribe so I can keep making videos like this one. The fourth money lesson from the life of David is to not rush financial success at the expense of our morals. In 1 Samuel chapter 24, David was given the opportunity to take a shortcut to become king. The only thing that David had to do was sacrifice his morals. In this story, the current king, King Saul, has gone absolutely bonkers. He's taken this massive army and he's decided to chase down David with the hopes of killing him just because he was jealous of David. And instead what happens is David is given a perfect opportunity to kill Saul and take over the kingdom. And in this story, you hear David's friends whispering in his ear saying, This is the moment that God has ordained for you to take over the kingdom. But David instead decides that success at the expense of his morals wasn't worth it. And this is why there's so much tension in the church about money. It's because it's so easy to fall to that extreme of, expending morals for the sake of money. So as you and I make money goals and hope to achieve them, as we think about reaching financial success in various ways, it's going to be so important that we focus on imitating David by securing our morals instead of sacrificing them at the expense of financial gain. The fifth money lesson from the life of David is to keep wealth in boxes. And what I mean by this is that whether you're absolutely loaded or totally broke, we need to give every dollar a name. And in 1 Chronicles chapter 26, we see David doing this exact thing. That he's taking the finances of the kingdoms and he's organizing it. Some of it's going to inventory, some of it's going to savings, some of it is going to the structures and the buildings in the kingdom. And in the same way, you and I are called to manage our money. Even when we get to the point where we are really wealthy, it's going to be so important for us to know where every dollar is going. Proverbs 27:23 says, "Know the condition of your flocks," i.e., manage your wealth. The sixth money lesson from the life of David is that godly wealth gives wealth. Whether you look down at your finances and see lots of wiggle room, or you find yourself living paycheck to paycheck, a godly person is somebody who is willing to give. In 1 Chronicles chapter 29, verses 3 through 5, we see King David call for the people of his kingdom to bring gold and silver and precious metals in order to build up the temple. But the first person to give to this campaign was King David himself, who gave somewhere near $6 billion worth of materials. So as a pastor, I would go as far as to say that if your financial plan does not include giving, it's not a godly plan. So I'll ask you this question: how would you like to give? How would you like to support your local church? And also, how would you like to support your friends and family? And there's lots of really fun and creative ways to do this. You can write anonymous checks and put it in people's mailboxes. You can pay for people's vacations, or you can just be someone who's willing and ready to financially provide when people are in need. If you found this video helpful or encouraging, I think you'll love this video right here where I talk about how biblical financial management changed my life. Click here and I'll see you there.